So naturally, when it comes to insurance itself, you're going to want to refer to the policy to see what is covered and really what's excluded. But let's presume that insurance is not a factor. Let's presume that in your case, you mentioned a neighbor's tree crossing a boundary. Well, it's going to depend in the state of Texas on the state of that tree. If you had a perfectly healthy tree and an act of God caused it to cross a boundary, there's no liability for that owner. The owner of that tree does not owe you any damages. That's just like hail coming in and damaging your property. That tree from somebody else's property, through an act of God, a flood, a storm, an earthquake, any of these things that cause damage to you, even though they originated on somebody else's property, are not a creation of liability on them. The same is true for your stuff. You have a tree that crashes right through someone's living room. If that tree was perfectly healthy before, but the sheer force of a natural disaster is what caused it to fall, then you do not have liability. However, if that tree was dead and its death was open and obvious, specifically if you were asked, please trim or take down this tree, it is a threat. Liability very likely exists. If your dead tree topples over and causes damage to a third party, you can expect a claim against you or your insurance policy. If their dead tree falls on your property and causes you economic harm, you may have a claim against them. So a lot of it has to do with whether or not it is reasonable to assess liability. It's much more reasonable if that tree is dead or dying and has branches that are likely to cause harm, even in a small storm. So that's the nutshell version of that.
Now, if you can drill them a number of times, if those limbs wipe in a storm, is you liable?
Again, it comes, so you asked tree limbs that cross a boundary. Does the crossing of the boundary create liability? Again, it has everything to do with the health of the tree. Those tree limbs, once they cross your boundary, you have every right to go and give those trees a haircut. If you choose not to, and you don't have to, but if you choose not to, that's your prerogative. If, however, a healthy tree after a natural disaster causes you damage, no liability is created in that scenario. Because it's an act of God, yes. You can take it up with him. Yeah. Your rights extend up into the atmosphere, or right below planes, right? So you can go straight up, and yeah, anything that crosses over, if someone has a lemon tree that goes over and it's shooting lemons, you have every right to grab those lemons. You also have every right to trim that tree and say, nope, you're not going to cross my boundary.
How can I, what happens if the neighbor, they don't have insurance?
Well, that's problematic, because if they don't have insurance and they don't have money to pay the damage, it's going to be difficult squeezing blood out of that turnip, right? Now, the health of the tree, you're going to want an arborist. We have a tree czar in this group who you might want to call. And so if you call Larry and he comes out there and says, this was an unhealthy tree, and the reason that it broke is because it was diseased or dead, then you could maybe make a claim against that neighbor. But if you have no reasonable expectation that you can recover from them, this might just be something you have to eat. You can file a claim, you can file a lawsuit, but if they don't have the money to pay, you can't squeeze it out of their homestead. Mm-hmm. If they're insured, yes, but if they're not...
Can I file in my insurance?
You have to read your policy to see if it covers acts of third parties. It may not. It may exclude those acts. So you're going to want to read your policy to see what's included.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things the guy said on Thursday, which it's just like when we're buying a property, if it's not written in the policy, it doesn't exist. So when you read your insurance policy, make sure it says, replacement of this. Not, because sometimes people didn't know this, and I didn't know this. My ex-mother-in-law's house got destroyed in this hurricane, a huge tree uprooted and literally landed. I would have never thought this tree would ever come down. And it crushed her entire house. And it says replace, not repair, rebuild. So instead of rebuilding her house as it was, she only gets a check for a little bit because the land is worth more than the house because it's in Spring Branch. So the property's worth $250, and the house, the whole property together is raised at $300. So she gets $50,000. That's it to repair her. That's what she would get. And you're going, because that's what the insurance they had on the property, and you look at it going, so if it's not written in the policy, same thing as with your insurance or with when you're writing a contract. If it's not in there, don't expect to be covered by it.
Yeah, the house that we had the most damage on is a small house, and we'll probably max out the claim. It was through Texas Fair Plan, if you know what that is. I mean, if you have rentals, you probably know what that is, but they don't cover near as much. I would probably get $80,000, but the max limit on our insurance is like $55,000 or $56,000, and it's gonna max that out. By the way, that we did have a tree fall on a neighbor's house. The tree looked good, and it uprooted where it blows over. It's not like it broke in half or something. I went over there and took pictures of the tree, just so that if they make a claim later and say, oh, it was dead, I called them, whatever, I've got pictures, videos. I took 50 pictures of that tree just to make sure I've got something in the file for later.
Ray, I'd like to address, piggyback on these comments. When you have a construction crew or a tree crew that comes out to do the work at your home or your rental properties, you have to know these guys. And I highly suggest you have some form of some simple contract, at least, that indemnifies and holds you harmless if one of these guys fall out of a tree, or they cut themselves, or they step on something in your yard. You have to be careful to make sure these guys are either bonded, insured, and there's some type of agreement here that indemnifies you, because the last thing you want is some type of accident where one of these guys are 50, 60, 70, 80 feet up in the air and they fall out of the tree and they claim you're liable because you did not warn them of something. Maybe they touch a live electrical wire that's hanging around that they don't see. But anyhow, be extraordinarily careful to protect yourself and your property when you have others come on. This includes construction crews. So we can talk more about that later, but just a note in case you're in that situation right now where you need your trees trimmed or you've got electrical problems. Everybody's having issues to some degree from the storm that we had. How many of you were involved in that straight line derecho storm from about 45 days ago? I was in the shower when the thing happened. I hear the beep, 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 beep on the radio, and 3 minutes later, I've got a tornado coming down my street, landed several trees that severed houses. It was a nightmare. You thought you were dreaming something crazy. I've been through every type of imaginable disaster that you can imagine in the 50 years we've been having property management. We've been through category 4 and 5 hurricanes. We've had explosions, electrical fires, everything you can imagine. So anyhow, if you want to see me later about that, let me know.
In your membership packet, we have a form in there for, it's a contractor form, and it has a lot of the language in there. You can, if you want to fill in the blanks, I'm not an attorney, not practicing attorney, use it at your own risk or run it by an attorney to see if it makes sense. But that form exists in your membership packet when you signed in. Many years ago, to keep it short, we bought a property, had huge pine trees on it. So I just knew one of those pine trees was going to fall on top of the house. So I said, I need to see insurance. And they said, we got it. And the day of the job, about 8 guys show up. This is on Elm Grove. About 8 guys show up. And I said, where's your certificate of insurance? And they said, well, we have it. We just didn't bring it. I said, it's hard to stop somebody because, I mean, these guys are there to work. And I said, I need that insurance. And I said, I'm just not going to let you start working. And it was hard for me to stop them. You know, it's hard to stop that bus. And the next day, they got on the job site, and they had the certificate of insurance. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because it will happen just like that. They'll make promises, they won't deliver, and all you have to do is get their insurance carrier's name, pick up the phone, and say, will you send me a certificate of insurance? Those guys are used to sending those out all the time for their contractors. That's a part of what they do. They'll send that out. And the next day they did show up on it, so I called the insurance company to verify it, and she said, yeah, he was running around here yesterday with his head, like his head was cut off trying to get the insurance. So they were going to ramrod that through and lie to me. So just cutting trees down is like, I don't know of anything in this universe that's more dangerous than cutting down trees. So,
Well, Ray, that's like Robin Thompson's story. I'll never forget this one. When anybody comes on your property to do work, make sure they sign. She had that house in North Carolina she was talking about. She's a big guru on rehabbing. And one of the roofers, somehow they had broken the contract. She got sued and lost $1 million as the homeowner because the contractor had let a guy on the job site that was semi-drunk and fell off the roof. She wasn't even there. But that's why you always make sure that these people have their own insurance and that they sign a waiver. Even if they're cutting trees, anybody that does work on your properties, make sure you have them covered.
The park that we rent from liable, or because it's a healthy tree, they are not liable?
Again, if that tree was perfectly healthy before and it fell through entirely from an act of God, there likely is no liability. I don't know what your contract with the park says and whether the contract creates liability. A terribly written contract might, but otherwise most do not. In fact, most will probably disclaim liability for acts of God, just like that. And really, a couple $1,000 probably isn't even worth you filing the claim if your deductible exceeds that.
Right.
So yeah, it is likely an out-of-pocket cost that you'll have to take that probably has no liability on a third party. Well, for what?
For fences, when there's damage done to a fence by the hurricane, it leans one way, it leans the other.
Yeah, there's a couple of factors. Number one, who owns the fence? On whose boundary is the fence, or within whose boundaries the fence? So this is where reading your survey is important, because if that fence was built by a prior owner 100% on your property, that's your fence. If it's 100% on your neighbor's property, that's theirs. If it's right on the line and it's one of those friendly fences, then it's half and half. The position of the fence is extremely important. Where it gets really complicated is where it does this, where it's half on yours and half on theirs at a weird angle, maybe even cuts into somebody else's property. You see all sorts of weird things when you start actually paying attention to your survey, and you start figuring out, oh, this isn't even my fence. And so then you have to decide, do I put up a fence on my side of the boundary, or do we talk about sharing a friendly fence right on the boundary? So yeah, there's a lot of questions to ask.
Also, too, we did this because my mom's got knocked down. If it is touching your house, it is part of your insurance. So hers goes around. Now, the two on the side didn't go down, but her back one that does to the school. So the insurance company came out because she had some damage to her roof and stuff. That fence is also in her insurance policy to be repaired because her fence touches her house, so therefore it's part of her house. And that's what one of the guys said.
Though, let's say it's on the back end of the
It is
lot,
on the back. It's on the back.
But because it's contiguous all the way around.
Because it's continuous all the way around and it attaches to her house.
Right.
That's what the insurance guy said on Thursday. So when we checked for her policy, if it touches your house, it is part of your insurance for your house.
Yeah, that was a really good YouTube.
I did not know that. That was pretty cool.
The other thing on fences, a lot of times they think if the 2x4s are turned towards you, that it's your fence. So that's just kind of a wives' tale. And my advice is to go try to talk to the neighbor and get them to split the cost. And like, we generally will get fences done cheaper than, say, a retail homeowner. So just let them know that. Just say, look, we're really gonna negotiate on this, get a good price on it. Would you be willing to pay half? And then the other thing is, if they got big dogs and you don't, they've got more of a problem than you do, right? So it's a negotiation. Like, what are you going to do with those big dogs?
Or little dogs.
Yeah, or even little dogs. They're family members. They're always family members. I hope your dog doesn't run away.
Question: how many of you currently, as of today, you know that you have some type of repairs on your property that needs to be done, whether it's minor? Look at this, over half the room. Okay, just a suggestion is get the names today of repair crews that we have used before, and if it's not an emergency, try to hold off as long as it's not damaging your property. The prices will come down. Your normal repair costs on a fence right now is running about $25 to $30 a foot. A linear foot, thank you. So if you can hold off, like I had about 40 foot in my backyard restored yesterday because of pets, etc. Which brings up another question. If the pets are accustomed to running around in the backyard and your fences are down, be careful. That could create some type of liability. It's still your responsibility to get that fence up, keep your pets in your yard, because if they're out running around and they're not dog tagged, Ernie will tell you this, you got some liability there, especially if they bite somebody or create some type of nuisance, and or they can be picked up by animal control, and or you can get a fine by the city or the county. So anyhow, back to repairs. If you can hold off for maybe 30 days, you'll find that the prices will come down, but you want somebody reputable doing your repairs.
So the guy said, well, we can get to it, but not now. And he came back and put a blue tarp on it. And I didn't want a blue tarp because it wasn't that bad. But what this contractor told me was, the way the roof is now is fine. It's going to take 3 months to get someone out there. So any damage that occurs from that roof, damage having not been blue tarped, is my responsibility. So I know it looks hideous, but if you have a damaged roof and you let someone know about it, get a blue tarp.
You know, you bring up another thought too, is like our roofer's been doing roofs, and Justin works with this guy exclusively. He's been doing roofs for us for 35 years. And he's so busy right now. For him to work for me, he has to take a pay cut. So I'm just having him do emergency repairs. But the other thing is, when we're hiring people, if you can get local people that have good referrals, that have great reputations, that's the way you want to go. Like with Antonio, if we find a problem 6 months from now, we pick up the phone and say, Antonio, can you come and take care of it? And he goes and takes care of it. If that guy's out of North Carolina or someplace else, you're never going to see him again. So if we can use local people, we have a lot more control over on the outcome. And if we can use people that we know, and I want to just talk about one other thing, is referrals. If your neighbor is a retail type person that does one remodel every 20 years, her referral is going to have some level of value. I mean, take it for what it is. But if you have somebody like Justin who's hiring contractors every single day and he lives and dies by those guys keeping their word, that's a different kind of referral. That's a much more powerful referral.
Yeah, guys, knowing your contractors is very important. My best friend is my GC. He's been doing it for 20 years. I will call him and say, what do you think of this? He's like, it's $20,000. I'll be like, okay, get it done. And I go and see the house when it's done and we put it for sale. I don't even go and pick out anything. I don't, because I've trusted him. I've known him for years. The roofer, our foundation guys, we've all been family for decades. And once you get it done, they'll do heaven and earth for you, and they'll charge you regular stuff. And they'll come up and say, look, my prices went up because of the 2x4s or this. And it's so much easier when you know them because you can trust them on your property. You don't have to spend your time checking every 2 days. When you're looking for deals, that's your job, is looking for deals, not checking. It's like when you say, for people going, we tell people, team up with people. Why? Because if you're sitting here putting on your marketing hat and then you go to doing your rehab hat, by the time you get back to marketing, your funnel is done. Your job as an investor is to buy houses, not to manage other people and everything else. That's why you find these crews that do it well, so that you don't have to be a rehabber. You're just like you did with your son. Same thing as I'm going to do with my sons if they ever get their head out of a computer. But you team up with, it's just like I don't talk to people on the phone. My mother does. That's what she loves to do. She doesn't do any computer work. Why? Because But, you know, it's the same thing in the Army. You call 2 is 1. Yeah, she is. She likes hearing people's stories about blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. Your mom died, whatever. What do you want? And that's why she's like, you do not get to talk to people anymore.
So I wanted to address something very quickly because your question raised an important point, particularly for those of you whose personal houses are not at stake, but your rental property is. And so it's important to consider the factor of how long a repair will take and whether or not it is a necessary repair. So if something is totally cosmetic, you really don't even have to do that repair. If it's entirely cosmetic, however, and this is what the law says about these repairs, if the defect has a material effect on the health or the safety of an ordinary tenant, you have to act with diligence to get that done. And you take in certain factors, the availability of labor, the availability of supplies, your insurance, all these things extend what it means to be a diligent landlord. But you can't just kick back and say, I'll get around to it when the stuff dies down. You might have that liberty for your own property, but you don't have that same liberty for your rental property. So make sure that you make an adequate assessment of the damage to your rental property. And if there is a defect, you got to do something, maybe even like putting a blue tarp, because if you've got any kind of entrance, water intrusion is a huge problem, but animal intrusion is another. You know, if you don't have a very big hole in your roof for squirrels and raccoons and other things to enter into the property and cause potentially a health hazard to your tenants. So make sure that you assess adequately the problem that's there. If it's purely cosmetic, it can wait. But if it creates a defect that potentially affects the health and safety of your tenants, you have to act, and you have to act with diligence. And one last thing I want to mention with this is communication. The fact that you're acting behind the scenes may not be adequate for your tenant. You want to communicate with them. Let them know, hey, on day 1 I did this, and I'm following up with you a week later and letting you know this is the progress of the work that's happening, because I'm already getting tons of calls from landlords who are saying, I got tenants freaking out about repairs. I'm already getting people who are saying, I'm getting letters from attorneys who are demanding repairs. What do I do? Well, one way you can prevent that is to be the diligent landlord, and the second is to stay in communication so that your tenant actually knows what's going on. Again, shortage on labor, shortage on materials, and insurance claims all extend the process, and they're perfectly legal and legitimate reasons for delay, but you want your tenants to know you are on it.
One other thing, a good comment, Ernie. Yesterday I visited with some people who live in an apartment complex off of Burgoyne and Voss, and they have been without electricity since the storm. And so how many days is that now? 10 days, I'm just guessing. So there's some major liability there because the owners of this 200-unit apartment complex have been negligent. The problem is not CenterPoint. The problem is the electrical conduits that were damaged by the storm. So watch out for that and get with Ernie on a legal situation like that. Next thing, if you've ever, on my block from the hurricane last week, we had 2 more homes that were damaged by falling trees. And I know for a fact that they're both rentals. The owner hired a contract crew to come in, and guess what happened? The 2 different crews on 2 different houses did not get a city permit. That creates an entirely different situation. one of the ladies, they drive around in inconspicuous little white cars, City of Houston inspectors. She drives up, I'm driving out of my driveway, and I pull up next to her, smile and say hello, whatever, and she just red tagged these two homes that were being repaired that did not have a permit. So be very cautious if when you hire someone to do construction work, double check, triple check, make sure of the permit situation, because the last thing you want is to get shut down, red tagged with fines, and then they're really going to scrutinize your repairs. I know we probably all have pets, but be very careful. Make sure they're tagged. Don't let them run around loose in the streets, because once someone reports that, animal control is going to drive down your street. And if they find your animal loose and running around, they're going to cage it, and they're going to write you a citation, and you're going to have to appear in court. And that's just, that's nonsense. You should not have stray animals running around. And you'll find stray animals in many different neighborhoods. It has nothing to do with the type of neighborhood you're in, whether you're in apartments, condos, townhomes, single family, in the heart of the Galleria.
Well, I just want to tag on something, Ernie, and I'd like for you to repeat what you said, but he gave 3 reasons why people aren't going to get immediate results on their stuff. And I've been doing this a long time, and we haven't always been perfect. We've had tenants for a long time. The tenants will always work with you. I mean, like 99% of the time, they're going to work with you as long as they know that you care about their problem and you're staying ahead of it. What were those 3 things again? You said material?
Yeah, so shortages on material, shortages on labor, and then your insurance claim. The property code specifically carves out if you are in the process of a claim, you can wait until your insurance resolves the claim before the work begins, and that's usually the biggest delay. Sometimes it's labor, sometimes it's material, but it could be your insurance claim taking a while to cut a check, and that's a perfectly legitimate reason for delay.
Also, Ray, thanks for mentioning that. Curiosity, how many here today have at least one rental property? At least one. Okay, over half the room. Okay, if you have not walked your property, your rental properties, and even your home, and I'm not saying just walking around the perimeter, either you need to have walked your roof or have someone, a reliable, intelligent roofer, to walk your roof and take photographs if there's damages. Almost all of our rental property receives some type of damage, minor in nature, but your cauliflowered shingles that have popped up can lead to future problems. We've had chimneys blown away. We have had turbine vents blown away. We have had shingles and other things on roofs that were attached just disappear. There were recorded winds of 95 miles an hour in gust in Harris County and down as far as Freeport and Galveston. And you may have only gotten 80-mile-an-hour winds, but you could have just as easily gotten 95. So as these winds progress, they will do serious damage to your property, especially on your roofs. So if you can get a reliable roofer to walk your roof, get with your neighbors. Sometimes you'll get a better price if you can go in together. We've had people with townhomes that are attached. And in a townhome, there's a major difference. A townhome is not a condo, and a condo is not a townhome. A condo, you only own the airspace. In a townhome, you own the land, even though it may be attached to another townhome. And in a townhome, you're responsible for your, usually, your roof, and your exterior and your yard and your fence and all of that. So make sure you know what you are personally responsible for in a condo townhome situation.
I want to add to that too. In our office, we're not allowed to sign a lease, do a conveyance, or do sign in a settlement statement without 2 sets of eyes seeing that. And that two sets of eyes theory, one of our private lenders, lifelong private lenders, probably she's loaned me millions of dollars. Her house got serious damage, and Justin's going to rebuild that house for her. I went over there with Justin, and I was looking around, and I saw about 75 to 80% of the damage, but I didn't see the other 20 or 25%. And if Justin wouldn't have been with me, pointing some of the things out that I was missing. So if you're looking at this, have somebody, another set of eyes, and it doesn't even have to be somebody that's been like Justin, who's done 50 or 60 rehabs, just somebody that's actually looking for any kind of damage, and it'll make a difference.
Video, the inspector already went to our house, but we don't know how can I
I don't know
them?
the exact answer, but I know that from like Ike, where we had claims, and Alicia, we had claims, we were almost always dealing with the adjuster that worked for the insurance company. That we're in a new paradigm. The adjusters almost never work for the insurance company. So now they're all independent contractors, and we asked the 3 or 4 adjusters I've met so far, they all kind of echoed the same thing, is I'd ask them, I said, are you going to be working this claim all the way through? 100% of them said no. We turn it in, and then there's a desk adjuster. And I said, well, so I can't talk to you, or how does that work? He said, no, you keep me in the loop. This is his advice, and I think it was good advice. If anybody else has experience on this, please cut in, because this is a new paradigm. Keep them in the loop. Find out who that desk adjuster is. Start yourself like a file of the phone numbers and everything, and just be that squeaky wheel. And on that, when we're talking to the what was his name, Lewis, the insurance guy, he was basically saying that, and he lives in that world. And he's saying, know what's in your policy. Talk to your adjusters, talk to your adjusters, talk to your adjusters. And if you want, we'll talk a little bit about public adjusters in a minute. I'm anti-public adjuster in the beginning of the process. But if you're not getting the results, then you either need to think about hiring an attorney or hiring a public adjuster. The problem with hiring an attorney or a public adjuster, and I want you to weigh in on this too, is you lose the ability to communicate at that point. At least with a public adjuster. I don't know how it would work with an attorney. If I was your attorney, I'd say, okay, you're hiring me, don't talk to him anymore, because I don't want you to screw it up. Now, you might have...
No, that's right. We don't want mixed messages, but what you're talking about is kind of a separate matter. That's where you're having difficulty with your insurance company, and unfortunately, with every natural disaster, there's going to be claims against insurers who are slow or just straight denying proper claims. And that's another side to your diligence, is you got to stay on your own insurance company, and you got to be responsible to your tenant and complete repairs on property where you have people living. And I wanted to talk about very quickly, because I think this is like large on a lot of people's minds. I know this because I keep getting calls about this. What are your responsibilities and your liabilities to the tenant's personal property? Your roof, part of it got knocked off, and water came in and ruined a whole living room worth of stuff. Let me tell you, you should have a lease that disclaims any liability for their personal property. That roof came up, ruined that whole living room. You should owe nothing. That same lease should have a requirement that your tenant purchase renter's insurance. That insurance should cover a claim for their personal property. Your insurance should cover your structure and your acts. But remember, an act of God is not you. In that instance, you would not have personal liability for their stuff. I had a woman who called, panicked, because her roof came off of her property and crushed her tenant's car. And her tenant said, you owe me a car. And I said, that's just not true. Your lease specifically disclaims this kind of liability. And your your lease specifically says their personal property can only be insured by the renter. That nothing in any of the insurance owned by the landlord covers the personal property of the renter. That's key, and that's important. The second element to this is if the roof partially came off or completely came off, you have one of two scenarios. Partial you might have for an extended period of time even, partial inhabitability. That room may be completely unusable for 15, 30, 45 days. What does that mean for your rent? What does that mean for your tenant? Well, it probably means that they're due a reduction in the rent for the loss of habitability for that limited portion of the property. That's a conversation you should have with your tenants so as to avoid any future claims.
And that also, and that also because I remember this having your insurance, say you're doing a claim on the roof, like you said, have to report. You report that to your insurance company and they reimburse you for loss of, I can't remember the name of it, but it goes, that revenue you lose goes towards your insurance claim.
One other quick thing that TK just touched on is insurance. If you have rental property, if you have a homestead, there is absolutely no reason on the face of the earth that you should not have at least, I know the prices of insurance have gone through the roof, both on your auto and your homeowners and rental properties. Ours has. But you must have at least liability insurance. It is dirt cheap in comparison to windstorm, fire, homeowners, etc. And you can get door-to-door-to-door liability insurance for approximately $100 to $200 per door per year for a $500,000 or $1 million liability. Loss of rents, that is covered on your windstorm, fire, etc. So you can purchase certain amounts, like if you want 5,000 of coverage or 10,000 of coverage. It's a sliding scale on how much you're willing to purchase. But loss of rental income that Ray is speaking of is like a hurricane comes through Houston like 10 days ago, and the renters have to move out because the damage is so bad that they can no longer live in the house. Then the owner of the policy can collect loss of income. So if it's a $10,000 coverage, he might collect $800 to $900 per month as loss of income on that rental property. So it basically subsidizes the owner of the property. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
This is a comment, and back when we had I even get teary-eyed just thinking about it. When we had that ice storm, I had a renter in my house, and of course, in my personal house, I had water damage, they had water damage, but that was the scariest moment ever as a real estate investor. I literally, thank God my ex was an attorney, I actually had to talk to them all the time. I actually walked them through what I'm gonna do. I communicated, but it was still that threat of them suing. It was just horrible. That was the worst time I've ever spent being a landlord because it was scary.
Yeah, I want to jump on what Lawrence said with regard to 100% loss of habitability. If it turns out that, as a practical matter, your house is lost, where the tenant can no longer live there, so many, and this happens a lot, so many times the tenant will say, well, landlord, you got to put me up in a hotel until you figure this out. And that is just not true. You are not obligated to supply them with an alternate place to live when your house is destroyed through a casualty event. Yes, that's another thing that their renter's insurance should cover. In the state of Texas, chapter 92.054 of the Texas Property Code talks about partial uninhabitability, where you might talk about a reduction in rent for the amount of time when a repair is taking place. But the most important part is when you have 100% loss of habitability, or virtually 100%, by written notice, you must send, my advice, to your tenant a notice saying, I apologize for what happened. I'm sorry that it happened. Unfortunately, we have to terminate this lease immediately. And this is how it works practically. You send that notice of termination. Let's say you sent it on July 9th, right? Hurricane came in on the 8th. You send that notice, I am so sorry, 100% uninhabitable. Once the tenant moves, let's say it takes him 2 weeks to do it. That's what, the 24th of July. But they prepaid July. they're entitled to a prorated rent after they move, not before. After they move, they're entitled to a prorated amount of the rent and 100% of their security deposit. There's a 100% loss. And that's where your insurance claim comes in.
Say they don't get out by the 1st, that whole month's rent is still yours.
If they don't get out by the following first?
Yeah, like the next month.
Correct. So they would no longer have prepaid rent. And if August 1st comes and they haven't left yet, don't take rent. The unit is uninhabitable. If they refuse to leave, unfortunately, because they have no place to go, and that is possible, now they are a holdover tenant because you have terminated the lease and their stay was limited to that prorated amount for the rest of the month. Once that's out, you might have to evict a stubborn tenant who, and I've seen this happen, who even in an uninhabitable home refuses to leave. No lights, no air, no working water or other things. They just won't leave. In that case, you would have, but 99% of the time, they're eager to go because nobody likes living like that.
But if they want to, are you gonna, do you send the termination if once you rebuild it, you intend to continue to rent to them?
So here's the thing. Once you've repaired, once you've established habitability again, the right to terminate goes away. So you have to do it before repairs are completed. So you send that notice, the tenant leaves, you have zero liability, except for the prorated amount of rent up until, well, from the day they left to the end of the prepaid month, and their complete deposit. And so if you do this, you waive any liability with that tenant. Any of your business losses, that's an insurance claim, like we've talked about. But you want to be able to say to the tenant, I'm sorry, this happened. Unfortunately, there's no liability in the lease. The lease is now over. Please leave as quickly as possible. And they're going to say, well, what about my stuff? We talked about that. You are not liable for their stuff, as sad as it may be. They may have lost everything, but liability does not go to the landlord. Right? That's an insurance claim that they can file with their insurance if they have it. If they don't, unfortunately, the law says your hands are clean of that liability. Yes, ma'am.
Because they will raise their policy, their premium. So how can you find out if they have or not insurance?
So that's probably not something that you can find out because there's not a registry of insurance. So the way you would find out is if they refuse to give you their insurance, you have to sue them. Okay. And so you sue them and they can choose not to file a claim with their insurance and pay out of their pocket for these damages or take a judgment against them for these damages. But most of the time, if you sue them, they're going to choose to file the claim with their insurance.
What is the process? You have to email or send a certified mail to them?
I mean, that's always helpful. Yes, you want to create a record, but yeah, you're talking way down the line after you've had phone calls and sent emails.
We did all this.
Yeah. If they continue to refuse, or if it's true that they just don't own insurance, your only way to recover from them would be to file a lawsuit.
In our case, he say, oh my gosh, and he left. He doesn't answer anymore.
Well, that doesn't sound like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I don't have insurance. He's just, I think, minimizing the amount of information he's giving you.
Yeah, because I say, do you have insurance? He say, I don't know, and he left. He doesn't answer the phone, nothing.
One of the good ways, it's a little trick to find out if they have insurance. If they have a loan on the property or a lien on the property, they have to have insurance.
Okay.
So,
Probably.
if they've got a mortgage, I'll put a mortgage.
Yeah.
I can find out if he has a mortgage.
If he has
but
a
I don't think
mortgage,
so
then most likely that mortgage company demands he has insurance.
I think he bought his house from his brother.
Yes, and that happens too. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, even with a mortgage, their insurance will lapse. The mortgage company doesn't know. And if they're in that dead spot without insurance, because once the mortgage company knows, they will purchase insurance. That's super expensive, and they'll bill it to the owner. But if they're in an insurance desert and a gap, unfortunately, and there is no coverage, or in your case, they had private funding and there was no requirement for insurance, these things can happen. And so your only option then would be to assess all of your economic damage and then file a lawsuit.
Real quick, I've had 2 investor friends of mine call that are doing sub-2s, and both of the sub-2s they called about, they don't have the proper insurance. And when you do sub-twos, it's very easy to get into that trap. So if you're doing sub-twos, we can talk about it later. We need to make sure you do that right.
Yeah, you got to make sure if you're doing a sub-2 or something that you are co-insured. That means that that person cannot cash that check without your signature, because that person can go and take they don't have anything to do with the house. They can take the check and walk away, and now you're stuck with all the damages and stuff because they have the loan, but you have the property.
Well, that's not just sub-2. If you're doing any owner finance, make sure you're a loss payee on that policy. And that's easy. That gets screwed up all the time. We're dealing with insurance issues all the time on our properties where they'll rewrite it, and all of a sudden they won't put us as a loss payee anymore. And then that means they get the check. And if they get a $20 or $30 or $40, $50,000 check, we're not going to be able to get that back.
Ray, on your insurance policy, you're listed as an interested party, and if you have money in that property that you've loaned on, like owner financial or the first lien mortgagor, and you need to make sure that may be one of the most important pieces of paper that you have. And TK and Ray are right. If there's a major claim on that property and you're not listed as an interested party in first lien mortgagor, they get the check in their name. And what do you think they're going to do with that money?
Especially if you're owner financing it to somebody, make sure, because when we do it, we tell them that they have to have their own insurance and their own taxes, unless it's if we've taken it over sub-2 and we're owner financing. But you have to make sure you're on the insured, no matter what. If you're owning the property and renting it out or lease purchasing it, you have to be on the policy, or else you're not covered.
I would like to say one other thing. Sorry about this, but after Katrina, if you know where Hammond is, it sits on top of New Orleans on the other side of whatever that big lake is. We loaned a motorhome to some people that lived out there on like 5 acres, and their house was destroyed because of trees falling on it. Now, I'm not sure what the hurricane force was for Katrina when it got 50 miles inland. It's probably, say, a Category 3. Ours was a Category 1, maybe a Category 2 in some places, and of course it spawned tornadoes. My brother and I took that motorhome out there. You know, we had to take 2 vehicles so we could get back. So one of us drove the motorhome out there. They lived in that motorhome for 4 or 5 months. When we got on that property, every single tree, it looked like Houston, except every single tree was either on the ground or broken in half. There wasn't a standing tree. That was a Category 3 or 4. And it's making me rethink about having nice, pretty trees around my houses. And if you look, all the damage in Houston is not in the new subdivisions where they got 8-year-old trees. They're all in the 50-year-old subdivisions that have 80-foot trees or 100-foot trees. And like in our yard, we have 6 or 7 100-foot pine trees, and I'm thinking that they're not so pretty anymore when that sucker can fall on you. Justin's working on a house right now where it fell through right through the middle of the house. I mean, one of those big pine trees. So it's changing my attitude. Justin, tell them real quick about the HOA issue.
Yeah, also check with your HOA on repairs and stuff for roofs, because some HOAs, they won't allow patching on roofs and fencing and stuff. They'll make you repair the whole thing.
The roof needs repair, or should I take that into my own hands? You know, should I just do my own repairs at this point?
So, number one, it's going to depend on what your property management agreement says. Number two, it's going to be a matter of whether or not what the property manager has done amounts to negligence, because again, we talked about legitimate reasons for delay. Do they have a legitimate reason? I couldn't tell you. Just to go and tarp it, I don't know why they couldn't do that, or why they couldn't hire some contractor to go and tarp it for your benefit. So liability, it's going to depend on what your property management agreement says. If you've experienced zero harm from it, then there's zero liability to discuss. But yes, if some harm results from it, it's going to come down to whether or not they acted responsibly in accordance with their agreement in your property management service agreement.
And you can also, you look at it this way, if there's going to be further damage because you did not take action, that will not be covered because you didn't take action. So if I were you, I'd go tarp it myself, because I've seen this where it happens where they came back and they said, well, all this damage happened after because you didn't act on your own. Well, it was your job. They just say that's further, you should have known that this would have, caused more damage. You should have taken action, and then they will reimburse you for the tarp or whatever. But in my recommendation would be to do it yourself, or have somebody do it, because it saves it from, you may not know that there's a leak, and all of a sudden it rains, like it's supposed to rain this weekend, and all of a sudden, it's a sprinkler system from and they're like that. Well, it wasn't like that before. You knew it was damaged. Why didn't you take action to prevent the next damage?
Really have on your houses, and what do you think it's a good balance between lower premium, but also whenever you have a problem to be able to claim it on your insurance?
Most of mine, I take over subject to, and I just leave the policy they already had there in place and put myself under self-insured, or sorry, co-insured. But it all depends on your risk. Like, to be honest, what has been 10, 15 years since we had a big one like this one? So you gotta do your due diligence. How much risk are you ready to take? Except for my mother-in-law's, I have no damage to any of our rentals. So like we have one in Tifton, Georgia, where they have tornadoes and stuff all the time. That's at 2%. But that's because it's in an area that's dangerous. If you have places like we have some in Atlanta and stuff, I'd keep it at 5, because what happens in Atlanta? Well, somebody shot up the place. That's about it. There's no storms and stuff that can happen there. So it's the risk that you want to take. You have to evaluate your own risk and reward kind of thing. How much am I going to save versus how much, if something does happen, is it going to cost?
So we've had rental properties for 42 years, and we generally have never turned in claims. I mean, we've, in 42 years, typically having 60 to 70 properties, we've turned in 4 or 5 claims. So, and my goal is just to avoid the catastrophic claims. Like we had a person installed a machine inside of his garage and he burned down the house. So, it was a catastrophic loss, and so the deductible really wasn't that big of a deal. I'm bigger into saving money on the premiums. I'm still staying with that. If now that little tree, we bought houses that they were little trees and now they're huge trees, it's like, okay, I think I'm just going to cut those things down before they get to be huge trees. And on these houses, like we have a house that's maybe 6 or 7 years old, and that tree's getting bigger and bigger. The tree is, so maybe it's time to cut it down. TK used the word co-insurance, so we hadn't talked about co-insurance at all, but co-insurance means that if you insure, typically, if you insure, and there may be some changes to this, but what it used to mean is, I think it still does, if you insure the property for less than 80% of its rebuild value, then you're co-insured. So when they pay that claim, like let's say you insure it for 50% of that, they're only responsible for 50% of that claim, not 100%. So you have to get to that threshold of 80%. What you asked though was a little bit about, how much of a deductible. And so we're not going to turn in a few claims too, because it's just not high enough.
Right.
And
also on insurance, Ray just hit something very important. There's so many different types of insurance. Make sure you have the correct insurance policy. We have knowledge that some of our members have had the wrong type of insurance, and or they lived in a home as a homestead, moved elsewhere, rented out their previous homestead, did not change their insurance policy and notify the carrier, the agent, lost the home due to a fire, and legally they had no insurance and the policy would not pay because it was the wrong type of policy. One other example, last year we manage over 30-something properties. Okay, we were looking at the insurance coverage of this one owner. I was absolutely floored to discover that the owner, on all of their single-family homes, they had a condo policy, not a homeowner's policy. Had they had any type of claim, that policy would not have paid. From what insurance agent or information they got to have a condo policy on a single family, you've got to know what you're doing. This is hands-on management when it comes to any type of property insurance. Who owns what? It's the who, what, when, where, why, how, to what degree. We have to know what's going on with our properties, and insurance is just an absolutely number one category. Double check your policies when you get home. Make sure you've got the correct coverage, and if you have questions, you can see any of us.
My homeowner's insurance policy, which covers everything. Is there a rhyme or reason to that? Am I just going to bad insurance agents?
It's all about previous claims. The insurance companies all over America, due to these spring storms and hurricanes, like the derecho storm we had 45 years ago. And actually, a derecho storm is caused by a downdraft. If you remember back at Dallas DFW Airport about 25 years ago, there was a American Airlines that was coming in for a landing, and it actually crashed. It killed everybody on board. These derecho storms, they develop so fast, especially during springtime. Once an airplane gets caught in a downdraft, there's nothing to hold the airplane up. It's basically like a lack of oxygen, so to speak, where the plane nosedives because there's no atmospheric support. So all of these claims over the years have added up. There's dozens and dozens of insurance companies that have gone out of business. Their claims way surpass their reserves.
Two, and a reason is because it's same thing as when you, like, I don't rent, I always lease purchase, because a lease purchase person is going to take care of that property more. So the insurance company looks at it the same way. These are renters. The dwelling is usually for renters, and renters they look at as people that aren't going to take proper care of their property. So the insurance company is assuming they're going to do more damage than a homeowner would. Does that make sense? Because homeowners usually want to take care of their house. Renters could care less what their house so they'll just let things happen, and so that's how the insurance companies raise those over homeowners, because they figure the homeowner will be more responsible than a renter.
We only have a couple more minutes left. I wanted to just share with y'all what we're doing as a person that's been buying houses ever since I started started this game. We've historically bought a lot of houses after something like this happens. And what happens is people are, their lives are always changing. So somebody may have a 4-bedroom or 5-bedroom house and it's just, empty nesters. Now they're fixing to get a $100,000 insurance policy or claim, and they want to move, and they don't want to spend 6 months or a year dealing with contractors rebuilding it. So if you let people know that you're buying properties, you're going to have an opportunity to buy these properties. What we're doing, I'll just share with you what we're doing, is we've decided that we're going to drive 100 neighborhoods. We're going to pick our closest 100 neighborhoods to us, which is, like basically a quadrant of the Houston metropolitan area, right outside. And we're just going to own that area, and we're going to know what's going on. We're going to find out, we're looking for properties that are damaged. We're looking for properties that are not being cleaned up because it means people are kind of walking away from them. They're being foreclosed on, just anything like that. And we're going to let people know that that's what we do. We're going to reach out to them, and we'll use something like Connected Investors, where you can actually skip trace the people and communicate with them. We'll probably be doing direct mail. We're using, I just changed my account on LandGlide from individual account to a corporate account so that I can use the couple people to do driving for dollars, and just let people know, you don't have to be a vulture or anything, but you say, I buy houses. This may be a best time ever for you to buy it because now you don't have to do the repairs. We'll step in, we'll take it over from here. In fact, Debbie, you're working on a house, and she was telling me, what were you saying? There's like people they're coming to you and telling you where all the empty houses are. And I think right now, whenever there's stress, like, what happens January 31st of every year? Taxes are due. And that's when the people that have that house is sitting there, nobody's lived in for 2 years, they rethink like, hey, do I want to pay $8,000 in property tax and get nothing out of it? So whenever you have stress in a marketplace, then you need to let people know you might have a solution for them. And you don't have to be a vulture, and you don't have to take advantage of anybody. You just say, I have this as a solution. If you're interested, let me know. And that's kind of our attitude.
I think one of the greatest attributes of a homeowner, whether it's just your home or your rental property, is that they're not going to survive unless you give them tender, loving care and assume nothing. You can assume nothing because there's too many complicated situations that can develop from neglect of your property. So we're going to do a seminar in a couple of months that may be, in my opinion, one of the most valuable seminars. We're going to take all of the subjects that we discussed today and many more other subjects about maintaining your property. But let me leave you with a positive, encouraging word of advice is assume nothing about your property and your tenants, and you'll sleep better at night, I promise you.